I'm filming this on a day where it feels about 200 degrees Celsius, so this feels pretty appropriate to do. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am going to take the 2 books with 1 stone tag. This was created by Sean the Book Maniac and I've seen it once or twice around Booktube, but I thought it was such a clever tag that I wanted to put my own little spin on it. So the first question is about the second to last book that you have read, and that for me was an audiobook rereading of Matilda by Roald Dahl. I finished this one up about 3 or 4 days ago and I was in love with it, just as much as I would have been back when I was like 7, 8, 9 and would have read it for the first time. Matilda is one of the first books that I ever finished by myself, start to finish, without the help of my parents or anybody around me. So it always has got that little special place in my heart for that reason alone. But it felt really good to go back to it, having not read it in about 15, 20 years, and just go back and see how much I loved it again, rediscover everything that I loved about it from the first time, and kind of accidentally compare it to the film version and see what was different and what I would have loved from the film or from the book. The next question is the second book from the top of your TBR. So we're going to go with my physical TBR here, which I have picked out in the video that you would have seen at the start of the month. So second from the top here is The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. This one was given to me by my dad. We do a kind of little book swap if I have a book that I think he's going to really enjoy or vice versa. And I am going to buddy read that quite soon with Naomi from Naomi Reads, and I am really excited to see what both of us think of it. I haven't done a buddy read in a while, but I'm really excited to get back into it. The next question is to talk about 2 2-star reads that you have read, and the first one I'm going to talk about is unfortunately Love Her or Lose Her by Tessa Bailey. This is the second of Tessa Bailey's books that I've read. It's the second in the Hot and Hammered series, and it's not really a series in that you follow the same character through the same thing, but the side characters from the first book will appear. I didn't like the first book, which was Fix Her Up, and I thought I would get on better with this one because I had heard it's a little better than the first book. I've heard people whose opinions I would kind of agree with or have similar tastes to. I'd heard some of them had said that they preferred this one than they had preferred Fix Her Up. And then I went into it and I was so heavily disappointed by pretty much the entire book. One thing that I really did not enjoy about this book is how miscommunicative Rosie and Dom are throughout this book. There's so much going wrong in their marriage. This is kind of a second chance. Our marriage is falling apart. Let's kind of rebuild it and see what we can salvage here. And there's so much that's kind of not working for the two of them, but they don't really talk about what's not working for them and they don't really sit and talk to each other. The only time that they really spend any time with each other is their kind of like weekly scheduled sexcapades, which doesn't really feel like the kind of relationship that I would want to be in. And ultimately, by the end of the book, I genuinely thought that Rosie and Dom should have gone their separate ways and just realized that this relationship wasn't working for either of them. It wasn't bringing them anything and just cut their losses and moved on. It does also have something else that I really don't enjoy about books, and I've seen it in another one that I didn't really enjoy as much either, but it has the husband buying his wife a house without telling her or letting her see the house. And I genuinely, if somebody bought me a house without giving me any prior information about it, giving me any kind of opportunity to see the house, lovely gesture, but I will haunt you in your sleep. Another thing that really turned me off about that book, though, was how controlling and overbearing Dom was, to the extent where Rosie was going on a night out with a couple of her friends and he rallied his friends around with him and they all just went to the club together to kind of ambush their partners while they were all out having a good time and just going out dancing. I genuinely hated reading that entire chapter, section, whatever of the book, and it's kind of a miracle that I got to the end of it because I was about to DNF it about 20 times. The second book that I gave 2 stars to recently was Love Lessons by Jacqueline Wilson, which felt very much an anomaly to me because I love Jacqueline Wilson's books. She's one of my favorite authors. She was one of my favorite authors when I was growing up. I did an entire readathon based around her books a couple of months ago, And that was when I read Love Lessons for the very first time as a nearly 29-year-old woman and regretted my decision almost instantly. So Love Lessons follows a girl called Prue, who has been homeschooled for quite a lot of her life, but when her father has a stroke, she goes into mainstream education for the first time, and she's about 14, 15 or so. And she hits it off with her art teacher, and they start a very illegal relationship. Massive spoiler alert, but by the end of the book, all of the blame and all of the bad consequences get thrown on Prue, and this guy gets absolutely zero. He is allowed to keep his job, his marriage is intact, and Prue is sent away to a different school, and she is pretty much ostracized by the entire people that she knows. I absolutely despised it. I hate it here, get it out of my life. I cannot abide by such a book. I cannot stand by a book that features such a predator in it and doesn't deal with any of the consequences that should have been dealt with properly. I feel like it gave the completely wrong message to girls around Prue's age who were like, oh my god, my PE teacher is super hot. I feel like it was dealt with so badly, and I just could not oversee it from Jackie Wilson. I couldn't. The next question is to recommend 2 great books by the same author, and I'm going to go with an author that you probably wouldn't expect me to say for this, because I know that there's somebody who's floating around in your head at the moment, but I am actually going to go for Louise O'Neill. There are 2 specific books that came to my head as soon as I read this question. The first book is Asking for It, which was her second YA book. It features a girl called Emma, who is about 16, 17, and is sexually assaulted by one of the players on her local sports team. And it's very much a them versus them. Who do you support? Whose side are you taking in this kind of societal battle? I went to see the stage production of this in the Everyman Theatre in Cork about 2 years ago by now. 2 friends of mine went together. We drove back home together and we sat in silence in the car for about 15 to 20 minutes, just kind of taking it all in. The play ends and the stage goes to black, and then everybody just sits there in silence for about 3 seconds before the applause starts. And I think on our night there was actually a standing ovation that night. The book itself is just as hard-hitting, and it is definitely one that I would recommend to not just young teenage girls, but also to teenage boys, because it perfectly deals with consent issues and sexual assault and victim blaming and victim shaming. It's something that I think we should definitely put on the curriculum for not just the Leaving Cert in Ireland, but also for the Junior Cert, which is kind of our version of the GCSEs. I think every teenager around the world needs to read this book before they become sexually active. The next book that I'm going to talk about by Louise O'Neill is Almost Love, which was her adult debut. And this book follows Sarah, who is in a kind of a tumultuous relationship with Matthew, who's about 15 or so years older than she is. And there's very much a power imbalance between Matthew and Sarah. And you can see throughout the book that he is such a bad influence on her. He's completely changing her personality. And you can see as well that he is dragging her away from her friends, that he's completely changing who she is as a person, to the point where you barely recognize who Sarah was at the start of the book to who she was at the end. There is one specific action that Sarah does to a friend of hers that completely left me speechless. The book is one that will stay with me for such a long time. I haven't read it since it first came out, and I definitely need to reread it again, but I would recommend both of those books by Louise O'Neill completely equally. The next question is 2 bails or 2 books that you wish you had bailed. So I'm going to talk about 2 books that I had bailed. The first one is The Spark by Jules Wake, and this was on my spring TBR, but I don't think I can necessarily take it off because I didn't finish it. This one follows Jess and Sam, who meet each other at a party at Jess's aunt's house one night and hit it off instantly. The only issue is that Sam is going out with somebody at the time. Jess is single, but Sam has a girlfriend called Victoria. Sam and Victoria break up over the course of the next couple of pages, and Jess and Sam start seeing each other. They start forming a relationship, but they had been, I would nearly say, emotionally cheating on Victoria before any of that happened. That's mark number 1. Mark number 2, Insta love. I despise Insta love with an absolute passion, and I didn't really buy into it here. There wasn't really anything that I could see that Sam and Jess should have ended up together, would have worked really well together. I think they would have just fizzled out by the end of the book, but I didn't really see myself getting so invested that I had to find out what was happening. The next book that I DNF'd was Real Men Knit by Kwana Jackson. I went into this with kind of high hopes for it because I'd heard so many people online whose opinions I would value and go to for book recommendations. I heard they really, really enjoyed it, but it did not work for me at all. So the story here is about 4 brothers who are adopted / fostered by a woman who has passed away before the start of the book. And she runs a kind of knitting shop, knitting supplies shop, knitting club. The crux of the story is that one of the brothers wants to take over the shop and keep it running when the rest of them aren't really on board with the plan because it's kind of falling apart at the seams. There's also a woman called Kerry who comes in as a kind of an assistant to the shop, and Jesse, who is the main brother that wants to take over the shop. Jesse and Kerry start falling for each other throughout the book. At least I think they do. I got about 10% in and just did not enjoy this book at all. I felt the start of it was really, really painfully slow. It felt like it took so long to get to any kind of action or decision. The meeting that the 4 brothers have to decide what's going to happen with the shop happens about 15% into the book, and that felt a little bit too late for me for something that is so important to the storyline. As well as that, we often hear about the importance of show, don't tell. And this book was completely filled with tell rather than showing. And that's something that I think you need to balance out a little bit better if you're going to get my attention to keep me reading on with the book. So unfortunately, this book just did not work out for me. So let's talk about something a little bit more upbeat. The next question is all about 2 books that you really enjoyed this year. And the first one that I'm going to talk about is The Summer Job by Lizzie Dent, which came out in mid-April, and it's Lizzie Dent's debut novel, and it is phenomenally good. It's hilarious. It has fantastic kind of pictures that you can picture in your head of the Scottish Highlands, because that is where Birdie is sent on an assignment to be a kind of a sommelier, wine connoisseur in a very prestigious hotel in Scotland. The only issue is that she thought that this was going to be a very kind of a rundown area and that she would completely get away with pretending to be her best friend Heather, who actually is the sommelier and highly trained, highly sought after sommelier who is now going to Italy to try and give it a go with her Italian boyfriend. There's so much kind of subterfuge as to Birdie pretending to be Heather throughout the whole book that I loved reading. There's so much kind of, you see what's really happening in Birdie's head when she's being asked to recommend what kind of wine goes well with this fish, or what wine should I have with this steak, and she is just going, red? I mean, that's exactly what I would say. If you asked me what wine goes well with fish, I would tell you white. So seeing that kind of humor being put into the book was so funny. But there is also a very sweet romance that develops throughout the whole book. And there's also a moment from about 80-85% of the book on, there's a really nice storyline that involves Heather and James and Birdie herself that I really loved reading. The second book that I really enjoyed this year is one that I have spoken about here before, so I won't go into too much detail about it, what I thought about it, and that is Circle of Friends by Maeve Binchy. Before I picked this up, I hadn't read any of Maeve Binchy's books, but I genuinely really loved this one. It's the story of Benny and Eve, who are childhood friends from Knockglen, a fictional suburb of Dublin City, and when they are about 18-19, they go to university in Dublin, and a tragic accident on the first day of term brings them and 2 of their classmates much, much closer together than they would probably have been without this incident. It also has parallels about class issues, and it also talks about the societal expectations that you would have when you are even Benny's age, when you are of the class that you are, when you have the social standing that you have in the community. It's such a fantastic book. I cannot wait to see what other Maeve Binchy books are out there. I've got a couple of them on audiobook request already from my local library, and I am really excited to tell you what I think about the rest of them. Question number 7 is 2 favourite booktubers. It says to recommend 2 favourite new booktubers, so I'm kind of taking this as a one who is kind of brand spanking new in the booktube community, And then one who's not quite as new, but is new to me. My new to the book community recommendation is Naomi from Naomi Reads. Naomi lives in Germany. We haven't met each other yet, but I would really love to kind of just sit in the Starbucks on the Königsallee and just sit with her, talk books, get coffee, get cake, read, go to the Mayasche, buy about 20,000 books that we genuinely don't have the money for and kind of don't need to buy but still want to buy at the same time. Naomi has such a wide interest range when it comes to books. She really loves fantasy. She's read a lot of contemporary books. She has got quite a lot of historical fiction on her TBR. And if you would like to see any recommendations of German books that you should read, I would definitely go and check her channel out. The new to me booktuber, who I don't think is new to the book community, is Amy from Amy Reads. Amy is from the US. I think she is from like Tennessee, Kentucky kind of an area. I first discovered Amy's videos when she did the Babysitters Club book tag, which I haven't taken yet, but it will probably end up on my feed because I am obsessed with the Babysitters Club. I was kind of hooked on her videos ever since. She and I seem to have a quite similar taste when it comes to books, in that she reads quite a lot of contemporary adult fiction and a lot of contemporary adult romance fiction, which is something that I am definitely signed up for. I've gotten countless recommendations from her and they've all been absolute winners. And it also transcribes that quite a lot of the books that I would have read before that she has read are also books that we've both enjoyed. So I think that she kind of matches my tastes pretty well. So if you have enjoyed the books that I've been reading and want to see a little bit more of what's out there, Amy will definitely hook you up. Question 8 is a book that you have read twice. And I can answer this as of last night because last night I finished The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas for the second time. It hits a little bit differently when you read it in 2021 on the back of so much civil unrest and so much police brutality aimed at Black people. It's something that just hits a little bit differently, and I don't feel like I'm the person who's qualified to talk in depth about this book because it's not my experience, and whatever I can say is not going to mirror the experiences and the life experiences of somebody who is from the Black community and who has experienced the kind of things that are being talked about in this book. I would urge you, if you want to hear more about The Hate U Give, I would really urge you to go and seek out a Black booktuber who has read this book and hear and listen to their opinions on it. I'm going to have to skip question 9 because it asks you for 2 favorite quotes from 2 books that you've read recently. I know I should be doing this, but I don't focus on quotes a lot. It feels very kind of sitting in my English classroom when I was studying for my Leaving Cert and highlighting meticulously the books that I was learning or the plays that I was learning. It feels very kind of that situation to me. And even though it's 10 years since I finished my Leaving Cert this year, I don't think that mentality has actually left me properly yet. So I'm not really ready to start talking about quotes again. The final question is to tag a number of booktubers, but the booktuber number that you tag has to be divisible by 2. So let's see if I can actually count. I'm going to tag Shar from Thoroughly Enjoy Books, Shannon from 155 Reads, Anna from Me to Me at Midnight, Karis from Karis's Corner, Sylvie from the TBR Diaries, Leanne from Leanne Rose, Charlotte from Coiny Reads, and Rosie from Sparkle Books. Is that 8? Yes, that's divisible by 2. So those were my answers to the 2 books with 1 stone tag. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.